here. My wife told me when I came down here, she said, don't shake anybody's hand and don't hug anybody. I'm a hugger, so she knows me pretty out from the elders this morning. So I think we're all good in that department. We're going to go ahead and jump right into it. The nation and the world is talking about this virus, but we're going to talk about a virus that's been around for a long time and that's been killing families, been killing spiritual lives, killing marriages for years and years and years. And that virus is pornography. To start off with a working definition of pornography, pornography, or porn as it often is referred to, the shortened name, is any printed or visual material containing the explicit description or display of sexual organs or activity intended to cause sexual excitement. Now, having said that, there are things that people can pornography, as we say. In other words, back in the day, what is now described as poor man's pornography was the J.C. Penney catalog back in the day, turning over to the women's undergarment section. Now, that section was not intended to cause sexual excitement, but people could certainly, young men could certainly use that, and older men could use that for that purpose. But our definition is when it's intended. So pornographic pictures, pornographic sites, pornographic writing, novels, and the such. So what's wrong with pornography? Well, 1 John 2:16 says, "For all that is in the world, the desires of the flesh and the desires of the eyes and the pride of life is not from the Father, but is from the world." Pornography pretty much can cover all of those categories of sin. Certainly pornography is sinful. Matthew 5:27-28, in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus said, "You have heard that it was said, 'You shall not commit adultery.' But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart." So, just to kind of set the stage, in the audience that Jesus was talking to, when he was making this statement, there's people there, men and women, who are like, well, I've never committed adultery, so I'm good. But Jesus takes it a step further and talks about the heart and the intent of the heart and lusting in the heart. So those people who were feeling pretty proud about the fact that they had never committed adultery, quite a few of those, I imagine, sunk down just a little bit when Jesus said that. So this is Paul wrote to the Galatians 5:16-17, "But I say, walk by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh. For these are opposed to each other, to keep you from doing the things you want to do." Pornography will certainly, most assuredly, keep you separated from God and keep you separated from the Spirit. When you are engaging in that, you are doing something that is opposed to the Spirit. Now, let me just tell you a little bit about me, just a snippet of my story. So I did not grow up in a Christian home. Now, my mother is a believer, and she taught me about Jesus, and she would read stories to me, and she taught me the song. She taught me "Jesus Loves Me." She taught me how to pray, things like that, and I'm very grateful for my mother for doing that. But we attended different church services at different church groups from time to time, and it was sporadic. this issue of pornography, it's not just something that I address and deal with on a daily basis from a professional standpoint. I actually have a personal overcome it and work through it, because when I down there, I was exposed to pornography. You younger people aren't going to know what we're talking about, but it played these little cassettes. I still remember to this day, as little as I was, so we're talking, it had to be one of my earliest memories. I was supposed to be watching, but instead it was credits or anything like that. It was already smack dab in the middle of it, and a woman was performing oral sex on a man. I still remember that. Really had an impression on me because I had no. Really got that curious part of my mind working. Sexual joking and sexual comments were that's just what the adults, and I say it, only 8 years older than me. Then by 9, I remember I used to live across the gravel road from my grandparents, my dad's parents, and then we moved when I was visited, and we went to visit my granddad, and I remember my dad just told me, he said I needed to go stay back in my uncle's room. I snuck back out there and just peeked around the corner to see my dad, my grandfather, and my dad's youngest brother sitting on a couch watching a pornographic flick on the TV. And so I went back into my uncle's room. I didn't want to get caught, and so no devices, guys, so I didn't have anything to entertain me. So and then in my uncle's closet, I found a stack of Playboy magazines, probably 2 feet, 1.5 feet tall. And so I started looking through those magazines, and beeline for that room. My uncle wasn't there, and looked at those magazines again, because that was very interesting to me. I was very curious about those things. Education about this stuff, and I didn't know what to do with it. Nobody told me what to do with it, and that caused some problems for me. So, pornography use among children and adolescents. 11 studies, and this is several years old. Now, I've seen studies that show that first average age of exposure to pornography is now, I will say that in the 12 years that I have been providing counseling services to the young Christian men and women at Freed-Hardeman University, my clinical experience hovers right around 12 or 13. So that demographic that just says. Look at this second point here. Between 2008 and 14% to 49%, just in that 3-year span. And boys' daily use of pornography doubled. Now, can anybody take a guess as to why that number jumped up so high from 2008 to 2011? Nobody wants to take a guess? It was about 2008, I believe it was, when Apple came out with the first iPhone. And by the time you get to 2010, the iPhone 3 is out, and it's pretty mainstream. Most people have them by that point, from my memory. And I remember, because I was a counselor at the counseling center at this time, because I started at Freed-Hardeman in the fall. Boom changing what young men and young women were looking at pornography on switched to phone, like exclusively on the phone. And so back to that average age of first exposure, my experience, I hear this on an almost weekly basis when I get a new client, and one of the things they're struggling with is pornography. I ask them, how old were you when you were first exposed to it? And when I was about 12 or 13, when I got my first iPhone, or my first smartphone, every time. So this is having a significant impact to our technology. Technology is not a bad thing, but when unrestricted, unfiltered, and uneducated, it's a big problem. Pornography use among U.S. adults, the change over the decades. In the 70s, 45% of young adult men viewed an X-rated movie at least annually, at least once a year. And 28% of young adult women had viewed an X-rated movie at least annually. Then you jump up to a study that was, a survey that was conducted in 2014. 65% of all U.S. men and 20% of all U.S. women view pornography monthly. And 79% of 18 to 30-year-old men and 42% of 18 to 30-year-old women view pornography monthly. So the group that is the highest consumer of pornography now is, it was for a while 18 to 30-year-olds, but that's actually shifting now. And the 12 to 17-year-old range is about where the 18 to 30-year-old range is. What about pornography use among Christians? These numbers should be a lot lower, a lot different, right? I wish they were. 64% of self-identified Christian men and 15% of self-identified Christian women report viewing pornography at least once a month. 37% of Christian men and 7% of Christian women report viewing pornography at least several times a week. And my clinical experience say that they think they might be addicted to pornography or aren't sure if they are. Now, Christian population, there are a lot of times where guys come to me and they'll say, I'm addicted to pornography, but after I go through the assessment process with them, they're not actually addicted. They definitely have some of the symptoms, and they're definitely headed in that direction. A big reason for that is because Christians, as opposed to non-Christians and non-practicing Christians, as you would imagine, have a much higher level of guilt and shame over this kind of stuff. And so that's why they're more likely to be a lot more critical of their viewing and of their use. But still, 1/5 of young Christian men, and this was back in 2016. I don't know what the latest numbers are. These numbers are constantly changing. There's research coming out all the time, and the numbers are fluctuating. And I haven't seen any good studies recently, but I got to imagine that these numbers are going up. They're all continuing to go up. This generation of young men and women that we're seeing, the freshmen at Freed-Hardeman right now, were born in 2001, 2002. So that means their entire life, they had internet to access in their home, like fast internet. And then by the time they're 8 years old, 8, 9 years old, pornography on smartphones, is rampant, and everybody has a smartphone. Everybody, with a few rare exceptions. These numbers are only going up. We haven't seen the peak of it yet. Here's another interesting fact about pornography. Now, this, as you would guess, this research. Some people in the secular community, there is a movement called. It's an anti-porn movement, and just to clarify, if you ever hear the term anti-porn movement, okay, that just means that it's not associated with any religious group. Because if you're associated with Christianity, then you're obviously anti-porn. That goes with the territory. So there's actually a large anti-porn movement because of all the scientific research that is demonstrating just how catastrophic this is to a person's life and how damaging it is to their brain. So they do some really helpful studies. Although I wouldn't want to be the one conducting this research, but some researcher watched a lot of pornography to be able to track this stat. I hate how they had to get the information, but I'm glad that we have it because it tells us something about what's going on in pornography. 88% of scenes in today's mainstream pornography promotes violence towards women, and it's almost always a man towards a woman, a vast majority of the time. So 88% of all pornographic scenes that are out there are promoting violence towards women. And in 95% of those scenes, when a man hits a woman, slaps a woman, any of those types of things, in the pornographic video, the woman responds with either pleasure or has no response at all. Well, why does that matter? What does that tell us? What's significant about that? Well, that tells us that people who are learning about sex, which is our young people, because, they're not being properly educated. So most of our young people are learning about sex and sexuality from the internet and from pornography. So what are they learning? Well, this is how you treat women. This is what sex looks like. Men dominating women. And how does she respond? What do young ladies learn from this? Oh, that's what sex is, and that's how I'm supposed to respond to that kind of stuff. That's what they're learning from this. That's why this is so dangerous. Some ways in which pornography specifically affects the brain. So, watching internet pornography floods the brain with a chemical called dopamine. This is the craving neurochemical, okay? This is a good neurochemical. It's not a bad neurochemical. It is what, if I were to put a picture up, I keep saying I'm going to do this, but I don't want to trigger my own self. Put up a picture of my favorite flavor of Ben & Jerry's. You know what happens when I see a picture of my favorite Ben & Jerry's pint? I get a dopamine hit. Now, if I buy that and I eat it, well, then I get an even bigger dopamine hit. So dopamine leads us to crave food. It leads for us to crave sex, once we become sexual. And it actually leads us to explore new territory, to conquer new things, craving new ideas. It's what back in the early days led men and women to explore the world, search new territory. So it's not a bad chemical, but when you watch internet pornography, the brain is flooded with unnaturally high levels of dopamine. In fact, internet pornography has been referred to as a superstimulus. That means there is nothing in nature that replicates the level of dopamine hits a person gets from internet pornography. Nothing in nature. In other words, God did not design our brains to be able to handle that much dopamine without some serious repercussions. Watching internet pornography also causes a flood of adrenaline, that feeling of a rush. It's a dangerous mix. Causes a person to want more. And here's the thing, you get a hit of dopamine, but you don't get the opioids that typically follow when we crave something, and then when we get it, when we achieve it, we have this feeling of satisfaction that comes from opioids, natural opioids. Okay, no hit of opioids with internet pornography. Only craving. I only want more. I only want more. I'm never satisfied. There's four main things that I want to share with you that it does to the brain. It causes the brain to become sensitized towards pornography. What that means is, over time, this reroutes the neural pathways in the brain to prefer sexual images over, specifically, sex with other people. Because when you have sex with another person, that's the highest hit of dopamine that we can get naturally, before internet pornography anyway. And so, over time, a person who consumes internet pornography on a regular basis, on a continual basis, they come to prefer that over sex with a real person. You see how this could be problematic for someone who's not married yet but wants to be married one day? See how this could be problematic for someone who is married? And again, over time, tolerance level goes up, and in order to get those same hits of dopamine, you have to go to more extreme. You have to go to more of pornography, more deviant pornography. Another effect that pornography has on the brain is it causes hypofrontality. Basically, what this means is it causes your prefrontal cortex to shrink. You heard that right. It causes your prefrontal cortex to shrink over time. How is that? Why is that? Well, when you are viewing internet pornography, guess what? Blood stops flowing to your frontal cortex. Now, why is that important? Well, that's the part of our brain that's responsible for motivation. It's responsible for moral and ethical decision making. It's the last part of our brain that develops. Here's why it's especially dangerous for adolescents and teens when they get a hold of pornography, because their frontal lobe doesn't stop developing until you're about 25 years old. See, our brains grow forward, and the last thing to finish growing and developing is our frontal lobe. And so, think about this. This is where my moral and ethical decision making, what is right, what is wrong. When I'm viewing internet pornography, that is offline. Blood is not flowing properly to it. So if I do that on a regular basis, if I continue to broke my arm and I had my arm in a, or broke my shoulder and I had my arm in a sling like this for 6 weeks, blood's not going to be moving to these muscles as much over that 6 weeks, right? So what's going to happen to the muscles? Right? They're going to shrink. Same thing happens in the brain. There's also an effect of desensitization, loss of interest in activities and hobbies that you used to enjoy, even loss of interest in dating or even talking to other people. I've talked with guys who, they're just not, they want a girlfriend, but I mean, not really, because it's a lot of work. You got to go talk to them, and then, then you got to be nice to them, and it's just a lot of work. I can just go look at pornography. That's way easier. And not just that, but just it kind of dulls life in general. And then it alters your stress response, which means you get to where you become more easily stressed out by things. There's one aspect of it. But guess what you want to do when you're stressed out? You want what helps you cope with your problems, with your stress. And if your choice is pornography or any other unhealthy ways of coping, well, then that's what you're going to turn to. These are actual brain scans showing blood flow in the brain. There's a healthy brain on the left. There's a heroin addict brain in the middle. And then there's a porn addict's brain on the right. So, can a person become addicted to pornography like they can addicted to a foreign substance? Yes, absolutely. That discussion, that debate has been settled a long time ago. Here's the addictive cycle. In short, my belief system, I have ways of thinking and ways of seeing the world that are not healthy. That typically, especially for Christians, is mixing with my healthy worldviews and my healthy beliefs. But I've got some unhealthy views and unhealthy beliefs, and so I have these unhealthy beliefs about sex and sexuality and right and wrong, impaired thinking. Well, this isn't. At least I'm not having premarital sex. I'm just looking at porn. So it's not hurting anybody else. That type of impaired thinking, which can lead to and become an addictive cycle. And so when a person gets triggered, as we say, there's a precipitating event, and then they get preoccupied with looking at pornography. And then they go through their ritual, which is like links in a chain, steps they take, thoughts they have, feelings that lead to the compulsive behavior or acting out. Might be having sex with someone or doing sexual things with someone, might be viewing pornography and acting out to that. And then, especially for Christians, after that's over with, despair, shame, guilt. And a lot of times, especially if a person's not seeking help for this from the right sources, then that shame and guilt will spin around and just kick them right back into the addictive cycle. Like a lot of times when guys are struggling with this and we're working through it, and they start off, they're in the honeymoon phase, like, yeah, I'm going to beat this, and I'm learning all this stuff, and it's so helpful. And then invariably, they'll come back at some point within that first month, and their head's down, and I can already tell what's happened. I'm like, hey, what's been going on? Well, I slipped up this past weekend, and then I don't know, I probably did it 2 or 3 times over the weekend, because it was just like, instead of calling their accountability partners, instead of working their emergency plan, things that we've gone over that they can do differently, they just stay in that cycle until something helps snap them out of it. It's like, okay, this is ridiculous. I can't keep doing this. I gotta snap out of this. Now, I'm not going to go over all this, but I'll just say that another certification I have is I'm a certified sexual addiction therapist. It's a process I went through for about 1.5 years, 150 plus hours of training, 120 of those on-site class training. And basically, these are the tasks that help move someone with a sexual addiction, or some of which, especially the first 7, first 10 or so, helping someone who's dealing with a pornography addiction. These are specific regimented steps, and all of these have exercises attached to them, things for people to learn, things for people to do to be able to make changes. Now, someone dealing with has symptoms of pornography addiction, but not quite an addiction yet. If they really dig in, they can make some really good progress in a few months. And sometimes that depends on like how early they were first exposed to pornography and how long they've been looking at it while their brain has been developing. Some pornography addictions and sexual addictions, it can take years to fully recover from. And you know, when I suspect a young man or young lady's dealing with a pretty severe addiction, I let them know up front because I want them to know what they're up against. I want them to be able to count the costs. I'm like, look, I'm going to shoot straight with you. Like, this is going to be a long haul. Like, you're going to have to do a lot of stuff. It's going to be a long process. You can get there, but it's going to have to be a lot of work that goes into this. So, what can we do? You know, Scripture has a lot of good wisdom. Self-examination, and that's part of, because it never just affects one person. That's a lie. Pornography doesn't hurt anybody. Even if it's hurting me, it doesn't hurt anybody else. That is a lie. It's never the case. And so you have to examine yourself. You know, Psalm 139, if there's any wicked way in me. Okay, we have to have that mindset. We have to be humble. What happened? You know, humble yourselves in the sight of the Lord, and what? And He will lift you up. Now, it's a lot more difficult than just saying those words and praying that, although those are very important things. But we got 5 minutes. Is that right? Perfect. But that has to be part of the process. I tell young men and young women, like, you're going to have to humble yourself to levels that you probably never have before. You have to be very humble through this process. You have to be honest. You have to speak the truth to yourself and to other people, and speak the truth in love. You have to seek wise counsel. You know, Proverbs 11:14. You know, if a person doesn't have guidance, if he doesn't have counselors, then you know, he's not going to do very well, basically, is what that proverb is saying. And in an abundance of counselors, that's where you find success. So that plays into having accountability partners, but, you know, that may also include professional counsel, someone who is specialized in this and helping people work through this. What else can we do? As a people, as Christians, as parents, as grandparents, as ministers, as elders, as deacons, Bible class teachers, you name it. We have to provide an environment of love and safety and security. We have to provide an environment where people can talk about this, because if we don't, well, then they're going to continue to suffer in silence. So we have to talk about this. We have to be accepting to help people who are brave enough. I tell every single person who comes to talk to me about this, I take a moment to say, I want you to know how proud I am of you and how incredibly brave you are for coming and admitting this. Because it's not easy. It is not easy at all. And if it's in a marriage relationship, in a family, you know, when this comes out, you know, if wife finds out husband's been, you know, had this secret pornography, issue going on for a long time, okay, she's not going to be part of your support system for a while. In fact, she is going to need support of her own. Through the Certified Sexual Addiction Therapist training, we not only learn how to help those overcome sexual addiction and pornography addiction, but we also learn how to work with partners, with spouses, with family members, and help them deal with the fallout that comes from this. Because there's a lot of women, especially a lot of wives over the years, who have gotten the short end of the stick on this deal. And then the last thing I'll say is, last two things, strong accountability. You have to have accountability. You cannot do this by yourself. You will not make it. And then as parents and grandparents and leaders, we have to teach our children. We have to teach our children the right things about healthy sexuality. We have to teach them about the dangers of pornography and how it can affect them. And I have some really good resources available that Brother Mark made copies of. I got several pages, 4 pages of resources of websites and books that can help you with any type of issue in this area, in this department. So, with God's support, humility, hard work, and commitment, we can overcome the devastating effects of pornography. But it takes all of these things. Thank you for your time. I look forward to talking more with you later.